a whole topic perhaps another time. That's the central philosophy of our deen, right? The role that the masjid has in the Muslim Islamic religion is far more than even the theoretical role conceived of the church in the Christian religion, or of the synagogue in the Jewish religion, or of the temple in the Hindu religion. Right? The masjid is a sanctuary, is a place where people are meant to visit, is a place for people to go to disconnect themselves. Again, sometimes at some level you need 5 times disconnection from your life. That is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of His generosity and mercy, has prescribed 5 daily prayers, so that we would disconnect from our daily life 5 times and connect ourselves to Him. So without disconnecting, it doesn't mean disavowing. We don't have to relinquish our studies, relinquish our jobs. But it means that there have to be moments in our day in which we disconnect from our job, from our studies, even to some extent from our families, from our home life, from our office life, from our friends. And that disconnection obviously has a parallel, simultaneous connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And that connection is called dhikr. That connection is called remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whether a person does it through formal ibadah, such as prayer, recitation of Qur'an, istighfar, or a person does it as a separate type of ibadah, right? That person simply sits down and makes dhikr or remembrance of Allah. But we need that connection. The more and more we disconnect from our daily lives, and the more we connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more it will be easy for us to remember our essential purpose, and it will be easy for us to remember the akhirah. So in other words, what we need to do is really need to be the opposite of this, at least at times. In other words, we need to be people who would love the akhirah and forget the dunya, as opposed to people who love the dunya and forget the akhirah. In other words, sometimes, although it's true that in Islam there is no monasticism, you're not supposed to become entirely otherworldly, but definitely in Islam you have to become partially otherworldly. There have to be moments in your day in which your love for Allah, your love for akhirah causes you to forget entirely the dunya, to forget entirely your mundane life. That disconnection has to be there. So there's not disavowal, but there is detachment and there is disconnection. The second thing mentioned in the day, right, is that they will love property and forget the grave. What that means really, in a sense, is that they will love their physical surroundings, their physical dwellings, right? And they will forget their ultimate physical destination, which is the grave, and then the penultimate destination is again the afterlife, right? In other words, and this is something that comes up over and over in the literature, which is called dhikrul maut, or remembrance of death. And sometimes literally it includes remembrance of the process of death. Now, how many of us ever actually think about that there will come a day in which I will pass away, right, from this earth. There will come a day in which people will gather around my body. Some people will wash my body. Some people will take my body away. My body will be prayed over. Then I will be taken to a grave, a cemetery. A ditch will be dug in the ground. I will be lowered into that mud, into that soil, with just a cloth or a coffin around me. And then that grave will be sealed. People will throw dirt and soil and mud over me. And then everybody will gradually walk away. And I will eventually, over time, be forgotten in this world. Right? Those of us even who may have parents who passed away, how often do children even go to their parents' grave? At best once or twice a year. Right? How often do children go to their grandparents' grave? Maybe once in a lifetime. How many people can say they've been to their great-grandparents' grave? So it's just a matter of time before a person is entirely forgotten in this world. That there will be nobody left who remembers them, unless they leave a sadaqah jariyah, a legacy of students, of knowledge, of scholarship. Today we still remember Ibn Hajar Asqalani. Today we still remember Imam Bukhari. Today we still remember Imam Abu Hanifa. Today we still remember Imam At-Tabari. But unless that we leave something like that behind us, the vast majority of us human beings pass away from this world forgotten. I have no idea what the name of my great-grandfather is, any of them. My maternal, my paternal, on any side. I have no idea what their names were. I have no idea where they lived. I have no idea what type of lives they lived. I know nothing about them. And basically that is what happens to a human being, is that they become forgotten. So if we ourselves are going to become forgotten by the world, then it befits us that we, while we are living, should forget the world to some extent. And so then the opposite of this would be that they forget their property and, okay, I'm not going to use the word they love the grave, but they are conscious, or they remain aware of the grave. And again, This does not mean that this has to be a perpetual state, that day and night a person becomes obsessive and all they do is think about their grave. But there have to be moments. There have to be moments in our life, ideally frequent, and we actually reflect upon this reality, that one day we will enter the grave, and that will be a very long-term resting place for us until we reach the day of judgment. And just like that, there doesn't have to be a disavowal of property, but there has to be a detachment. You know, a very oft-quoted example that I've also used with you is that when a person goes on a journey and they check into a hotel room, they don't develop any love for their hotel room. Why? And they don't feel any sadness at all when they leave the hotel room. Because they know from the moment they checked in to the moment they check out that this room is not my permanent abode. This is just a temporary place of stay that I've chosen to take up. I'll be in this room 3 days, I'll be in this room 1 week. They don't fall in love with their hotel room, right? And the reason they don't fall in love with the hotel room is that because they know they're going to move on. Well, just like that, then a person is not meant to absolutely fall in love, right, with their dwelling or with their home or with their room or in any physical attachment to this world. Right? Again, it doesn't mean they're supposed to hate the world or hate their room or they can't like the decoration in their room, but they're not supposed to love it, and again, specifically, they're not supposed to love it to such an extent that it distracts them from the reality that this is a temporary abode. Okay? So we're not supposed to love the dunya to such an extent that we become distracted from the reality that this world is temporary. Just like that, we're not supposed to love our physical surroundings, our physical our habitat that much that we become distracted from the reality. That, in fact, the quite looming and absolute certain truth, right? That this is just a temporary. I mean, this is a universally accepted truth. Whether you're Muslim, you're non-Muslim, you're an atheist, agnostic, there's just one thing that every human being in the history of humanity and every human being alive today agrees upon, is that everybody will die. Right? Death is a universal reality that nobody can escape, and the logical consequence of death, the necessary conclusion from that is that this world is temporary. This world is transient. Whether you think that this world ends when you die or you think something continues is a separate thing, but nobody can deny that anything that anybody has in this world is simply temporary or transient. The third thing that the Prophet mentioned in the Hadith is that they will love wealth and they will forget the day of judgment. Now that's getting a bit more allegorical, right? Loving the dunya and akhirah contrast is understood. Here there's a notion that there's a contrast between wealth and the day of judgment, or wealth and accountability, right? I mean, literally the word here is just hisab, just judgment. It doesn't say yawm al-hisab. So they will love wealth and they will forget judgment. In other words, what this means, sometimes the love of wealth that is forbidden is that if you love wealth so much that you become distracted or oblivious to the fact that you will be accountable for how you earned your wealth and accountable as to how you spent your wealth, right? And that happens sometimes, that if a person gets so caught up in something that they forget that this wealth is just a bounty and a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that we will be accounted for each and everything that we did with this wealth. And specifically, this can also be used to refer to the pursuit of unlawful means of acquiring wealth. For example, interest, bribery, corruption, fraud, deception, any type of unlawful business practice or any type of unlawful way of earning money. And if you look at Pakistan as a society, from the top to the bottom, this society is rampant and rife with people who are acquiring wealth through unlawful means, with people who are trying, who wish, they could only wish that unlawful means were more available to them, or that they were more competent in unlawful methods to amass and acquire wealth. So it becomes a type of greed or a type of materialism. Okay, and this particular is where you could bring up materialism or greed, which blinds a person to the broader notion of accountability and moral responsibility that they have before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The fourth thing is even more interesting, that they will love their children and forget the truth. On the face value, a person might get a bit worried, right? Especially women might get worried that what is this? You know, why is it that loving children has in any way been linked with forgetting the truth? Again, these are not necessary linkages. What this really means is that they will love their children to an extent that their love blinds them and distracts them from the truth. So what is it? What type of love? What extent is that? What type of love might one have for children? And you could take an umumi mana, you could take a general meaning of this as well, love their family members. So it could apply for spouses, it could apply for parents. So the original mahal of the hadith is children. There are many examples of that, right? I can give you countless examples of so many aunties who come to me about their children, and they have so much love for their children that they gave everything to their children, they spoiled their children, and they forgot to morally raise their children properly. They forgot to impart spiritual teaching to their children. And the vast majority, really, of the English-educated classes of Pakistan, of the English-educated classes of Pakistan who are not religious, the vast majority of them are not quote-unquote religious because their parents did not bother to teach them anything about the religion, or their parents themselves were such poor role models that anybody looking at parents like that would have failed to even come up with any notion while they were growing up that there could have been anything called spirituality or anything called deen or anything called obedience and submission to Allah. But nonetheless, these people love their children, and sometimes out of love for their children, they will forget the truth, they will forget the haqq. In other words, they will prefer something for their child, even if it is something perhaps that Allah SWT has not preferred for them. Right? They might place their children in educational institutes that might challenge children's belief. And they do that in the name of love for their children, love for the education that that child should receive. Or they will allow their child, or even encourage their child, to go into careers such as banking that might be unlawful or prohibited, but they will do it out of love for their child, out of a desire that the child have money, their child have status. So their love for their children basically, or their desire for their child to have a certain respect, status, wealth, etc. in the world, sometimes makes a person forget the truth. Interestingly, not only is this mentioned in this hadith, but in fact it is mentioned in the Qur'an al-Kareem that spouses and children can potentially also be a distraction from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That it's possible a person might, out of love for their family, and again, if you relate it to the previous one, you will find people who will tell you that no, the reason I engage in corruption or bribery is for the sake of my children, or for the sake of my wife, or for the sake of my husband, or for the sake of my spouse, right? So their love for their family blinds them from the truth, from the reality of their existence, their purpose in this world, and basically their love for their children makes them forget the truth. Now, this does not mean, if you look at the Anbiya, the Prophets alayhi salam, they had the most love for their children, but that didn't blind them from the truth in any way. So the love that Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam had, let's say for his sons, Sayyidina Ismail alayhi salam and Sayyidina Ishaq alayhi salam, or the love that Amma Hajra radiallahu anhu had for her sons, right, is phenomenal, is much more than the love that most fathers and mothers today have for their children, right? But that love did not blind them from the truth. So in this particular case, it's not in any way suggesting that we cannot have intense love for our family. You can have an extremely intense love for your family member. It's not the degree of love that is being cautioned against, it's the kind of love. That if that love blinds us to our respect or observance of the Qur'an, Sunnah and Sharia, then that love itself can be a distraction. And the fifth and final thing, which is perhaps the most powerful, is and they will love themselves and forget Allah. Right? So not that they will love the world over Allah, right? Not that they will love this life over the akhirah, they will love property over the grave, they will love wealth over judgment, they will love children over truth, but they will love themselves and forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is really the ultimate crime. And that is why basically at the mention of that ultimate crime, the Prophet ﷺ, then in a state of probably emotional sadness over such people who could go so far in this distraction that they forgot Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the Prophet ﷺ says, they have nothing to do with me and I have nothing to do with them. And that's extremely powerful, right? And again, this is not saying that, okay, such a person becomes a kafir, unbeliever, right? That has something to do with a person's belief. But if a person becomes so distant, the Prophet ﷺ is saying that they have nothing to do with me. In other words, they've abandoned my mission, my message, my teachings to such an extent that they love themselves and forget Allah, that it's as if they are not in my ummah. Right? So those are the first four categories of Prophet ﷺ in the beginning, right? In the beginning, the Prophet ﷺ starts out by saying, my ummah, right? So my ummah will love 5 things. All of these people, they're being counted as the ummah. That's how the Prophet is viewing them. But emotionally,